But the thing that actually really surprised me was he drank less than 500 milliliters of fluid per hour for 7.5 hours. So he was on the low end. It wasn't like super hot. It was pretty nice temperatures, I think, for running. But I thought that was pretty low, especially when you consider how much carbohydrate is taken in. Because like my understanding is the more carb you take in, the more fluid you probably need to go along with it. So I'm going to ask him about that if there was something that I missed in that data spreadsheet. But anyway, it was like, you know, he at the intensity he was running with, I assume he's on a high carbohydrate diet. I know he's been into like the gut training stuff. So I want to talk to him about that in terms of just like how he came up with that number, if that was just what ended up playing out on the day, or if he was specifically targeting that just north of 100 grams, and dig in because we have other ultra runners who are doing that now too. The most interesting one is maybe Kilian Jornet, who the reason he's more interesting to me is because he doesn't do gut training. He just goes with 100 grams though on race day. Wow. There was a breakdown of his fueling for what was it, UTMB, Ultra Trail Mont Blanc, and he was like 100 grams per hour for around 19 hours. So it's like that's where I start to get curious because I mean, I could do no gut training and it could get away with 100 grams for an hour or for 2 hours without having any noticeable issues. But if I got to do that for 19 hours in a row, I'm going to have to do some gut training if I want to do that.
Sure.
But he doesn't, I guess. I guess he actually kind of almost is like intentionally fuels very minimally in training and does these really long sessions with very little fuel. And then, but on race day goes hyper high on that. So
yeah, I mean, we obviously know he's like a freak of nature, but like some people, I think that all goes and just like points out the importance of doing like experiments yourself and like individual variability and like your physiology. I mean, you might be a higher fat burner than another ultra guy who's going to just be like smashing the carbs during an ultra, marathon. And so like you said, people can go and if they're interested, you can go and see what your like fat oxidation and carbohydrate oxidation rates are during a test and like use that to inform your training. But it's like, there are hydration guidelines, there are carbohydrate guidelines for athletes, but like, so that's, on average, that's going to work for like most athletes. It might not work for you. It might not work for everybody. Some people can't like eat anything, during or before a race. And it's like, we're going to have to figure out a way to kind of bypass that. But, yeah, I mean, it's interesting that everybody can respond differently and doing no gut training and being able to tolerate that. I mean, it's just, maybe he just got lucky with that, being able to do that. I mean, I say lucky, but he obviously is like doing incredible like training runs. And I'm sure there's something to what he's doing that allows him to not have to gut train, but who knows what that might be. Yeah.
You want to be careful with the outliers in terms of how you structure your stuff, which is also interesting because when you look at the most basic data that has kind of gotten pushed around in the endurance world for a while is like 90 grams per hour, where you have like, and this is, I guess, been altered to some degree, but originally it was like 60 grams, 30 grams from like a maltodextrin to a fructose spread. So you can kind of have the pathways allow you to get 90, whereas by themselves you'd have to do less than that. Whereas now I think you can technically do more fructose without having to worry about it. But anyway, it was like, 90 grams is an average. So are there people that can do 120 and absorb it? Probably. Are there people who can only do 60? Yeah, that's probably also true. So at a certain point when you get like Tour de France athletes, it's probably going to start selecting for that to some degree, where everything lines up by the time you find yourself winning the Tour de France or competing at the Tour de France. So maybe the majority of those guys are just able to absorb a higher amount of carbohydrate than what we would expect, and therefore getting up to those 120 plus grams is going to be beneficial. Who knows?
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, eventually are we going to get to a point where like the ability to win a race is just going to come down to like who can fuel the most and who can tolerate the most? I mean, you think that it would eventually maybe like get to that point where, everybody's lining up at the line, everybody's got a freaking super high VO2 max, everybody has the latest technology in the super shoes, everybody has, the optimal like wind resistant or, the aerodynamic clothing and stuff. It's like, we're all on a level playing field. Everybody has the latest in nutrition. Everybody has the latest in training. It's like, when it comes to race day, like, is it just going to be like who can absorb and who can like fuel the best during the race? Like, is it just going to become a F1 race where like the pit stops are just like the most important aspect, where you just got to fuel yourself and get to the line? I mean, it's kind of interesting. And like, are the best athletes guys like Kipchoge? I mean, is he able, he's obviously an incredibly talented runner, but like something about him makes him special to like break that 2 hour marathon barrier? Is it because he's able to, you know, take in 120 grams per minute? Cause like that might be required to break the 2 hour marathon barrier. I think there was a recent study, and I didn't read it, but I was reading a synopsis of it, where they ran models basically about like what elite athletes would have to eat to break the 2 hour marathon barrier. And it was something in the range of like 100 to 120. So
really?
That's basically saying like, if you can't take that in during, you know, your marathon, then you have no shot at breaking the 2 hour marathon barrier, because that's just like the fuel required to do it. Yeah.
So the listeners can just probably assume they're not breaking a 2 hour marathon.
Yeah, I guess so, man. Too bad. Broken dreams for me, I guess, and everyone else listening.
Yeah. The other interesting side of just kind of like running those numbers too is when you step away from the elite athletes and you think of like, what is the output that a normal average person training for a marathon is going to produce, where I think is where we're going to see the backlash of the gut training stuff and the high fueling strategies, because it's like, yeah, you get someone like Kipchoge and some of these guys who are well north of 1,000 calories per hour of work and maybe need that when they're following a moderate high carbohydrate diet. But then you take the average person who they might be much closer to say like 600-700 calories per hour. So for them, it's like the amount of energy output they're doing per hour may only be the carbohydrate side of the elite athlete from a total energy. So for them, it's like they don't need to be going anywhere near that in order to meet the demands of the job. So like, how much more digestive issues are we going to get with that population versus the highly tuned, like stress tested over and over again in training elite athlete, where they know like what their body's going to probably do with the inputs they're giving it?
Yeah, the pipeline from like the elite athletes down to just your, you know, weekend warriors or whatever is like always interesting. And that's where the criticism, you know, everybody loves to criticize Gatorade. It's like, oh, you know, you don't need Gatorade to fuel your like 5K and stuff like that. Well, it's like, it wasn't created for that. I mean, I know they're marketing for anybody who does like sports, but yeah, it is interesting. I'm sure there will be backlash, because you're going to get the average person thinking they need to, you know, take in 100 to 120 grams per hour when they don't. So